transparent there. Maybe also why, if you know me, you can see that I'm a little bit nervous on Zoom. It's because I don't know how to shift the power dynamic here. Like, it's throwing me off. It's just me talking to a computer screen. Anyway, so if you're interested in the mentality behind teaching and kind of expanding your mentality and shifting the power dynamic to give more power to the learner, I highly recommend this book. I think it's an important part of empowering people to learn and to practice on their own. There is a chat. I'm gonna look. Yes, Pat, thank you. So Pat sent the Amazon link. And the link, there's also a link in the slides, which I will, again, email to you after the fact. Yeah, I know. I checked our library system for this book. We don't have it. It is like more of an academic text. So it's actually something that I read when I was working at a college library. But you could get it through WorldCat too, or Amazon if you're interested. So anyway, that's kind of what I have to say about power dynamics inherent in teaching, and how like one of the goals is to shift our own mindset as the teacher and to transfer power to the learner. So with that being said, that might be a little much for some of you. It's really hard to suddenly dive in to a whole new mindset. If that's the case, and some of these concepts are more abstract than what you're ready for, totally okay. I would encourage everybody to examine this approach, this hands-free approach, within the context of your own library's mission statement. Because if you're not ready to really define a philosophy for yourself as an instructor, then at least you have some structure and criteria that you can already fall back upon through your own organization. So I've pulled 4 examples of random mission statements from Monroe County. And I really didn't have any rhyme or reason to why I pulled these. It was just like the first 4 libraries that I Googled and found mission statements for on their website. So basically, what I would like to say on this slide is that if you have a mission statement or a value statement that includes keywords like empower, engage, lifelong learning, growth, or discovery, if those concepts are anywhere within your mission statement, then that can act as your why in terms of adopting this strategy to teaching. All right, I didn't see any new chats on that slide. Looking good. I'm going to take a moment to hydrate. It is 90 degrees outside. I would encourage all of you to hydrate as well. I'm inside with air conditioning, thank goodness, but keep the water going. All right, back to the presentation. So that kind of covers the why of what we're doing. And now we're going to move on to the how. And let's see. My screen sharing is paused. Resume share. Sorry, 1 second. I don't know why Zoom is doing funny things. Can everybody see my screen right now? That's how. Just shout out on the chat if you cannot. Let's see, somebody's giving me, yes, thank you, okay. Kathy, Lisa, Caitlin, Brian, thank you. Thanks everybody for your patience with this. This is like such a funny environment. Okay, so we're moving on to the how, which is a little bit of the soft skills and the mindset that we want to bring to the table. And I'm going to go into our participants menu real quick and just mute all. I hear some feedback. There we go. And back to the how. So these are soft skills. However, you'll notice I put a hard hat on the bottom of the slide. Anytime you see a concrete outcome of this mindset work or these soft skills, there's a hard hat next to it to indicate these are tangible things that you can try in order to help you build the mindset or to practice the mindset. So there's a few hard skills thrown into the soft skills slides. So the first soft skill is active listening. And one of the biggest bullets and the most important things is to take a minute to look away from your computer, take a minute to redirect the learner's attention away from their computer. It might sound a little bit strange considering that you're trying to teach technology. However, the priority in good teaching is still the person. So you may need to occasionally look away from the machine. I'm getting a message that says, I have black box covering the hard hat areas. I'm not sure how to fix that. I can, let me unshare my screen real quick and I'll go back into it. You'll see me for a second. Hi, everyone. Let me start the screen share again and see if I can resolve some of these tech issues that are coming up. I don't know if I can, but you know, we'll try it.
When we share the slides, people will be able to see all of those texts as well, just in case it's covering something like the hard hat statement. It's there. It'll still be there when when we're able to share the presentation after the fact as well.
Okay.
And I am also recording most of the presentation. I missed the first couple minutes. Sorry.
Cool. No, thank you, Alicia. Yeah, thank you for popping in with that explanation too. Because, and actually, you know, this is part of my presentation. We'll get to it later. Is some of the frustration that can be experienced with learning new technology. So yeah, thank you for helping out with that. So I think actually we resolved a little bit of the weird issues going on. So I'm going to keep on rolling. So active listening, again, look away from the machine. And this may also involve the learner looking away from the machine. So a great example I have of that is an instance where somebody was trying to learn how to use the mouse. They really didn't understand how to click. And we had to actually take a moment to pause. And I had to stop them from trying to click because things were just going haywire. And in that moment, I had to say, let's take a moment to practice clicking without looking at the computer screen. And I was able to use my hand and literally show them the up and down motion of how to use a mouse. And also kind of watch them practice without the pressure of looking at a computer screen. So that kind of falls into active listening because you're redirecting the learner's attention kind of away from this thing. Even though they're trying to learn it, it's still a distraction. And we also want to be simultaneously listening to the person's technology story, right? So we have our own why as to why we're teaching with the methods that we use. But the learner's why is going to inform how you listen and how you approach each individual technology solution. Okay, so below under in the final bullet here, that is the examples of some questions you might ask in order to better learn the why behind this person's tech story. So you might say something like, you know, why did you choose Excel for managing your contacts? Maybe the learner had no idea that there were contact apps. And so you taking the time to ask that question and allowing them to provide a full answer gives you the background knowledge that you need to move to the appropriate solution. There might be a very valid reason they're using Excel, and so you would learn that as well by just asking. You know, asking questions like, when you're troubleshooting, when you're trying to help with a technology problem, you know, could you show me how this worked before things went haywire? And then that will give you a better feel for the user's original process. And then it will allow you to inform the solution that you give them. And always try to go in knowing the user's end goal, right? So the final example, you know, what is your end goal in making all of your family recipes digital? The person may say, I'm trying to turn them into a book. I want to get these printed professionally, and, you know, that's why I'm making them digital. The person may have a whole other reason entirely. And there are instances where technology is not the solution. So taking the time to listen to your learner and kind of trying to cultivate an empathy and compassion with the learner, that's really going to help you kind of move through the stages of your teaching. And I believe we're actually about to talk about empathy. Yep. So frustration, this is frustration is real. This is one of the big things that we see over and over again with multiple different types of technology interactions. People are really frustrated by technology. You, as the instructor or as the help provider, have kind of the responsibility to figure out, you know, what's really going on. A lot of times, people are not actually frustrated at the technology. They are mad at themselves. And that is not a productive mind state to be in when you're trying to learn. So if you sense frustration, it's really important to try to minimize any potential that the learner is frustrated with themselves. Once you've minimized that kind of self-loathing and that self-frustration, then the learner's mind is able to open up so you can move forward with your instruction or with your help. So a lot of times I'm using phrases that are just meant to be really reassuring. Things like, trust me, it's not you, it's the computer. The way computers are built are that they're always changing, and as soon as you master it, there's going to be another update, there's going to be a change, and that's okay. You want to assure the learner that they're doing a great job learning, no matter their speed of learning, right? So your perception of the person's learning speed is subjective, and it's something that you should really try not to kind of project onto the learner. You may think to yourself, oh, this is going so slow. I can't believe it's taking me a whole lesson to teach this person how to click a mouse, or to teach this person how to turn the computer on or open the internet. You know, that's not for you to decide. You are there to share your skills and your knowledge, but the learner may feel a great sense of accomplishment by spending 1 hour with you and learning how to Google one thing. You are not the one who's taking the validation of that learning experience away. So you really are responsible for being patient and encouraging to people of all different skill levels. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat here. We might have to circle back to some of these concepts at the end because we have some good conversation going on. There are times where things get very upsetting beyond regular frustration. And at that point, you know, unfortunately, we're not trained therapists, but at that point, it's your job to shift this away from technology learning and really speak to the emotions of the person. So when things get super, super frustrating, what I like to share, what I like to try is a 3-step process. It's called AAA: acknowledge, align, assure. The first step, acknowledge, is just you simply observing the emotion of the learner and acknowledging it. So you might say, my goodness, I can see that you're really upset by this. That's the acknowledge statement. Acknowledge the feeling. The second step, which is align, means that you should try to find a position of empathy with the learner. So after you've acknowledged the feeling, you might say something like, I really understand where you're coming from. I have experiences in life that really upset me too. You don't have to share specifics. That's not what aligning means. It doesn't mean spilling your guts. What it means is to just give a signal that allows the learner to know that you have felt what they feel. And then the third step is to assure them. And this is where things can look different based on every situation. But basically, you're going to assure them that there will be some sort of solution to the problem that they're facing or the feeling that they're feeling. So that might look something like, let's talk together on, and we'll come up with several solutions that's going to take this feeling, this upsetting feeling away. So I'm trying to think in the context of technology. Okay, so I might say, my goodness, I can see that you're really frustrated by the calendar app on your phone. I get frustrated when I'm learning new technology as well. So let's take this one step at a time so that we can really master this new skill, right? So I just did all three steps: acknowledge, align, assure. So that can help anytime a situation is very frustrating or upsetting. It's also a really good customer service approach anytime you're dealing with frustrated customers, not just tech. Basically, the bottom line is that people, when they are expressing those kinds of emotions, they just want to feel seen. They just want to know that somebody is hearing them and understands them. So that's the most important thing. And once you've cleared those barriers, then you can go right back to the learning, the technologies, the hard skills. Let me check on our chat and just see where we are, and then I'll move on. So Kathleen's here, and she's sharing some really good experiences in the chat box. For those of you who are interested in hearing personal experiences. Whoops, let me go back a few slides. Lost us here. Okay, so. And then finally, this kind of ties into the empathy piece, but it's also moving us into more of the hard skills piece. You want to remember to make comparisons to real life whenever possible. This is going to help people understand things on a level that is human, within contexts that are human and interpersonal. A lot of times people believe that like machines are cold, unthinking things, but they're made by humans. So we want to remember that, and we want to kind of draw comparisons to real life wherever we can. So some examples are, you know, when you're explaining hardware, people might ask you, you know, how much storage do I have? What's the difference? Why does it say 4 gigs of storage when I know I bought the 500 gigabyte machine? And, you know, you can compare it to the human brain, where there's one type of storage that's space, and that's how much information your brain can hold. And then there's another type of storage called RAM, and that is how quickly your brain can find all the bits and pieces of information and put them together. You know, and if you can make those human comparisons, it's going to be a lot easier for your learner to absorb the concept. The other thing I like to do, and this file systems tip, it kind of ties back into the active listening slide where I said to take a moment away from the computer screen. When you're helping people organize things on a computer, I often like to say, take a minute to imagine a real life physical filing cabinet. How would the drawers look? How would the folders look? How would the papers look inside the folders? What kinds of labels would you use? And quite often I'll even ask them to take a piece of paper and a pencil and write down a filing system before they go into organizing on their computer. All right, let me take a look at the chat. Yeah, Brian's saying for some people, a paper calendar is better. Exactly. I mean, that is why it's so important to be actively listening to your learner, because there are going to be instances where you might say to somebody, I really don't think technology is the right solution for you in this instance. You know, sounds to me like you might like a paper calendar or some combination of a digital calendar and paper calendar. So that's part of the job as the teacher, is to kind of reassure people that it's okay not to use a computer for everything. The other in real life comparison that I thought of after making the slide was the word platforms and social platforms. Everybody knows Facebook, Instagram, whatever, all those things can sometimes be referred to as platforms. And if you consider the real life context of a platform being a place where you stand in order to make an announcement or share your thoughts, you can take that real life context and it becomes a whole lot easier to explain social media or a digital context. So obviously I'm not pointing out every single real life comparison that you could ever use here, but just a few examples to get you thinking of where you might find some technological and non-tech crossover. So that ends kind of the soft skills portion of the presentation. So we're done with the hard hats, because pretty much everything on the next few slides would have been a hard hat. We're going into the very tangible steps that you can take in order to use this tech-free or touch-free approach to teaching. So concrete, tangible things you can do. You can sit on your hands. And that's actually where this whole technique originated for me. I used to work for a company that made us sit on our hands while we were teaching. And it makes a big difference. It's a game changer. If you're standing, you can put your hands in your pockets. If you don't have any pockets, you can clasp your hands behind your back. The theory here is that, yes, obviously you will still have the capability to unleash your hands and point at the screen. However, this sitting on your hands or putting them in your pockets, it creates like a cognitive barrier. So when you try to do that, when you try to point at the screen, or when you reach for the mouse to take over, your brain has a moment of awareness. And then you're able to say, oh, maybe I should keep my hands to myself and let the learner do this. It's also a good indication that if you're doing that, if you're reaching to point at the screen, or if you are reaching for the mouse, it's a good indication that there's some other techniques that you could be trying verbally. It's ironic that I'm saying this. If any of you can see my face along with the slides, you'll know that I'm talking with my hands right now. I'm very expressive with my hands. My second language is American Sign Language, so it's really hard for me not to use my hands. So there's some irony here, but in terms of letting the user lead, that's a good technique to try to create some barrier. This is cognitive behavioral therapy, essentially. It's creating an awareness and then redirecting your reaction to whatever the stimulus is. But I'm not, obviously, I'm not a certified therapist. So, you know, like cognitive behavioral therapy light. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Going to encourage everybody to use visual descriptions. This is one of these skills that if you feel yourself reaching towards the screen, or if you feel yourself reaching towards the mouse or the keyboard, you probably can strengthen this skill a little bit. using visual descriptions. So you might say something like, look around the upper left-hand area of the screen, or take a minute to look around, and then when you find the icon that looks like this, or when you find the icon that you think might do this thing, let me know. And you might even say something like, I see you're struggling with pop-up windows. These can be off-putting. Let's take a moment to observe different sizes of the windows and how the windows appear in the foreground versus the background. That last bullet is actually also an example of the AAA method. So you're bringing in these visual descriptors, but you're also using the acknowledge, align, assure. So these are some ideas of things you might try. And I know Kathleen, who's here today, I wanted to actually give a shout out to Kathleen, because Kathleen and I had a really nice conversation over email when the idea for this presentation was originated. And she really reminded me that a good teaching technique also involves adding a little bit of humor wherever you can. And so that's why we have the sliding duck. You know, I think it's up to the teacher to decide when the humor is appropriate, when the humor is not. One thing you will see with your visual descriptions, especially when you're using words like left or right, that people don't know their left from their right, and that's not a good idea to laugh at them when that happens. So if that's the case, if you say, look to the right of your screen and see what happens, and then you see instead the cursor move to the left, the eyes move to the left, you know, find a way to verbally redirect that isn't insulting, if that makes sense. A lot of us are tempted to say, no, your other left, which is fine for some people. Other people might get a little offended. You know, you got to feel the crowd out. You could also say something such as, you know, you're doing a great job looking at the top of the screen, but try the other side, or, you know, closer to me instead of away from me, that kind of thing. So that's the visual description. And we also want to be very aware of our language use and try to do some interpreting in our heads. It's a little bit easier, I think, for some of us who have a second language, because we like have some practice interpreting in our heads, but that's an encouragement for anybody, whether you have a second language or not, just to slow down and, you know, take the time that you need as the instructor to translate. So to you, you may know the technical term. Okay, this is a window. You know, I have my browser window open. But to the learner, to a new learner, that might be a box or a rectangle. Or when you're trying to explain these bigger computer concepts, you know, somebody who started out with computers in the age of computer programs may need you to reframe that. They may need you to translate words like app or client. I was in a Zoom meeting with somebody the other day, and they used the word Zoom client, and it is the correct word. But for me, even as a technology instructor and librarian, I was thrown off a little bit because I'm so ingrained and indoctrinated with programs and apps. So the word client was like a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. Try to be aware of your lingo, and if you can, step into the shoes of the learner a little bit and think about what language they might be using to explain the same concept. Take a quick look at the chat before I move on. Yep, Kathy just says the other way if someone's going left instead of right. And then Maria makes a good point. It's important too, due to different dialects and accents, specifically in Spanish. Yeah, we've got a really cool community in the Rochester area. I mean, this is a great place to live if you are interested in like learning and building your own personal empathy, because there's just so many people here from all different countries, speaking all different languages. There's a lot we can learn from being open to different mindsets. Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. This slide is talking about the terminology surrounding haptics. And haptic technology describes any interaction between a human and a computer that involves touch and sensation. So your haptics that you use when you're working on a computer with a keyboard and a mouse are completely different than the haptics that you encounter on a touchscreen device. Because they're completely different things, it might actually help to use distinctive terminology to describe to the learner what they're doing, right? So, you know, things like a click. The click is something that you only do with a mouse, if you think about it. When you're on a touch screen, you're actually tapping, you're not clicking. So it takes a little while for us to get into the practice of using these terms, and it will take a little while to become aware enough to catch yourself when you're saying, oh, click on that app to open it up, because it's something we all do. But if you slowly shift into using these more tactile terms, it actually will influence the way the user interacts with their device. It's kind of fun to watch, you know, how users progress based on your language as an instructor. So, you know, things like describing the exact motion of a tap that's light and quick and directly up and down. You know, tap and hold, on the other hand, is still a tap on the screen, but you don't lift your finger away. You keep it, maintain contact with the screen. The difference between a swipe, which is a quick flick of the screen, versus a push, which is more of an intentional movement, slow movement of one item around a screen. You know, these are all, we don't think of them as being important, but to many users, they are. They could make the difference between understanding and really struggling. I'm gonna go ahead and take a look at the chat again. Okay, thank you, Brian. Yeah, push also is a feature of an app that sends out notifications to users. Yeah, so please do be aware of Duolingos, you know, and you can point those out when you realize them as well. YouTube videos for computer classes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, feel free, you know, oops. Often we feel very responsible to be like the end-all be-all source of knowledge when we're in these technology training situations. However, you know as librarians and information resource professionals, we're not the end-all be-all of skills and learning. So feel free to direct your learners to YouTube, maybe, if they're comfortable with that. Direct them to written text instructions if they're comfortable with that. You may learn of other technology instruction resources outside of the library that you think might be appropriate. All of these things are part of what it takes to be a really good technology instructor and kind of allow the learner to take the lead. So that pretty much concludes my PowerPoint. I am going to kind of open the floor to questions, concerns, and comments. I am going to stop my screen share at this point. So you can type in the chat box your question or comment, or you can cautiously unmute yourself and speak if you're comfortable with that, and just try to be aware of more than one people speaking at the same time, see if you can work that out amongst yourself. So I'm going to stop sharing. And if you have any questions, let me know. And hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces. Makes me feel a lot better. Maybe I should have done that at the beginning so I wasn't stuttering through the first few slides. Thoughts? Complaints? Additional stories? Does anybody have like a good story to tell that ties in somehow to something I talked about?
Yep, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's good to just have them play when they're in class, especially older patrons. Just have them play with the app. That's why I go to Google Maps and let them zoom in and change things and move things around. So trouble is you got to do that near the end of class because they don't listen to you afterwards. But that's good. They're following. They're looking up their home they grew up in. They're going to another city, looking at Google Maps, and it gets them to do all the pinching and the click and hold and drag and all those different skills. So just have them play with that instead of making it formalized to teach. That works for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Brian. I think that's really important to acknowledge the necessity of play in learning. It's something that we talk about all the time in early literacy, but it doesn't get brought up in ages after adolescence. And it's still important. It's still something that helps in learning. So yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Anybody else?
Sometimes when you ask them to play with it, they don't know how to get started. They say, well, what do you mean play? So maybe you can show them something like, oh, here, click on this, and then keep going from there. But Brian is absolutely right to follow what the patron is interested in. And I've been so grateful to be allowed to do one-on-one training because one really good example was a nice man I had who had emigrated here from Jerusalem, Israel, and he loved Google Earth. He showed me all different parts of the country of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, and it was just wonderful, and I think he learned a lot, but you know, it wasn't necessarily a curriculum you would have in a class.
Yeah, so Kathy, actually that comment and that story really reminds me of another point that ties back into one of my first slides about the why of why we do this, and so about the teacher mindset. And I love your story because what that illustrates to me is that you learned something from your students. And I think that that is so critical and so important in the work that we do in technology teaching. So if you can enter into the communication with your student with the mindset of, okay, yes, I have a little bit of power here. How am I going to transfer that power? Maybe it involves me learning from the student, right? And any time that you are learning from your student, there's the power dynamic has shifted. So I love that, Kathy. Thanks for sharing. Any other thoughts?
I know that one of my hardest things is when people are typing, and it's such a little thing, but they just type with those two fingers. And the nuns taught me to type, and they would beat me if I didn't type correctly. No, they wouldn't beat me, but it's so hard when you know you can type it faster for them. And many of them learn how to use a typewriter, and the typewriter is the same thing, but I'm gonna have to learn to think differently now, I think. Because you just want to, like, you know, help move them to the side and say, here, I'll type that for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. And like, it's important to be, you know, recognized also in yourself, Kathy, and like your impulse in that is you're coming from a place of goodness, right? Like your impulse is to help them. So what you're doing isn't in any way intrinsically wrong or bad. It's just, you know, that mental shift from, you know, okay, what's more helpful, me doing it for them or me really like suppressing my own urge to make this happen and allowing them to do it themselves. Yeah, so it's such a practice. It is, because we really have to redirect our impulse to help immediately, if that makes sense.
I think the part of the problem is when you're on the reference desk and you're trying to do like 6 things at once, to take that time. I mean, for Kathy, she's sitting one-on-one, and that's a whole different situation. But you know, when you look back and you see, okay, there's 3 people waiting for me at the reference desk, and this person is going through and you're trying to explain it as best you can, or you know, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I not that I mind helping people. I love to help people on the computer, but it's especially we have a lot of patrons who really, they just don't know how to do anything at all. And I don't say that in a mean way. They just really don't. And
She's right.
Yeah, Kathy will tell you. And you'll be there for a long time trying, you know, trying to.
Yeah.
I think it's the demographic of our town.
Yeah. It's just,
well, the one thing that I will say in that regard is, you know, you make a very good point about doing this work while also on the reference desk. And some of that is an entirely separate customer service skill set.
Sure.
You know, in terms of setting expectations and also resetting expectations. So it's important to be able to say to the learner, you know, I'm really grateful that you're seeking guidance from me, but right now my job is to do this other thing. And if I could just come back to you in a moment or two, or if I could schedule a time for some one-on-one time, then we can really address the concern. And that's not what people want to hear right away. But there is something to be said for kind of setting that expectation that you don't, that's not what your responsibility is at the moment.
Yeah. That's a good point, and I certainly have done that with people before.
Yeah.
Said, you know, I will come back to you. I promise I will come back to you, but I have to go and do this thing now.
Yeah, that's good.
And I know
That's good.
Kathy's done the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
In Chi-Li, we encourage people to actually sign up for times to work with someone, even if it's for, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. So we set up an appointment. And they come in, they bring what they need to bring, whatever devices they want, their own devices. Does anyone else have that type of setup?
Well, I mean, we encourage people, if we really have gotten to a point where, okay, this person is going to need more help, we encourage them to set something up with Kathy where they will get the one-on-one help they need. But a lot of times, you know, people want to fill out a job application. They want to do it right then. They don't want to come back, and right. It's hard when they don't have any idea how to use anything on a computer, and you're trying to get them to fill out an entire job application.
Yep.
I just mean it's difficult. That's all. I'm not saying it isn't something we should work hard to be able to do. It's just difficult. That's all.
Oh, it is. It's very difficult. I think it's something we all struggle with as public servants, right? You know, and a lot of what I'm teaching today, like a lot of this method and a lot of this reframing and a lot of this customer service stuff takes a lot of practice, and it's hard. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I've worked at all different kinds of libraries. Marcia, Henrietta actually does the same thing that you do. We encourage people to sign up for these tech tutors. But I've worked at other libraries, even in different library systems that, you know, that don't have that structure in place. So it's so hit or miss. But yeah, it's all about reframing so that you can try to provide the best service at the appropriate time. And it can be very hard. Now we're 2 minutes away from 4 o'clock. So I do understand if anybody needs to log off. I'm kind of going to wrap things up unless there are like pressingly urgent questions. Let me just take a look at the chat real quick. Okay. So the chat is really kind of reinforcing a lot of what's being discussed verbally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. I do have the email list of registrations, so I will BCC all of you and email you the PowerPoint slides. I'm going to encourage you that if you have any questions that went unanswered here today, please just reply to me directly, and I will do my darndest to answer your question. Sometimes I know the answer, sometimes I don't, okay? So if you do have any unresolved quandaries, please feel free to email or reply all. Okay, thank you everyone. Really some very kind comments in the chat box, and hopefully I will see you all again once we're able to get back to work. Bye.